Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Guardians. I'm your host, Jeff Ellis, with my co-host, Justin Latta. Today's show, we're going to get into today's game. We're going to finally give Bryan Shaw his promise due. We're going to discuss postseason, specifically pitching, because it's going to take enough that we wanted to split it across multiple shows. But before any further ado, I want to thank you for making Locked On Guardians your first listen to and every day, wherever you should get podcasts. And how you feeling today, Justin?
I'm glad the Guardians didn't go to more into extra innings than they already did. That was like the one thing they had to avoid was extra innings this whole week.
Yeah, I'm also glad they didn't this was after yesterday's show. They did exactly what I've been asking, which was like, listen, the win doesn't really matter anymore. Let's be honest. Let's punt this one and move on. There's a lot of things that happened. Jimenez just keeps getting hit by, I talked about on the show, he has the all-time single season hit by pitch record, and he's just adding to it. He also stole his 20th base. So, he's in the 2020 club, 20 stolen bases, 20 hit by pitches. I don't know how many are in that club. I did not do the research, but, Tristan McKenzie was great again. Kirk McCarty, listen, he is valuable for what he is, but he's going to have a game like this. He is a nice depth arm. That's why they brought him back. And I think the other thing that stood out, Will Brennan multi-hit game, Oscar Gonzalez multi-hit game. Someone tagged us in a tweet today about, I'm going to butcher his name, about good old GA and his defense and fifth error. And we know the errors aren't exactly a great stat, but do you feel like he's rushing things? Do you think it's trying to do a little too much? He's doing a lot of positive things in the game with this call up. There does seem to be some nerves. This is the third call up for him this year, and he's getting an extended look. What do you think is going on with him defensively? Because one could argue that was his biggest calling card in the minor leagues.
Yeah, definitely known for his defense. I mean, what did he play tonight? He played shortstop some more in position tonight. The throw was just a rookie mistake. I mean, he threw to third base and he was trying to get a runner on extra innings, trying to make a play. I would imagine they would probably tell him that that's a play you want to throw to first and get the sure out in extra innings, especially in a game that doesn't matter. So one of those things where it's good to just let him get it out. I think there was another play. He didn't charge an error on, but it was a line drive or grounded that knocked him back. Not really worried about it for him long term. I think we all know the talent's still there. Just, jitters. He's playing second. He's playing short. He's playing third. I think he even played a game first. I think he'll be fine. Just getting all this stuff out the major league level, thankfully.
We talked about
playoffs.
Oh, sorry. We talked about Brendan. We talked about Naylor. Isn't it kind of interesting that after everything that's happened, and I'm sure we'll talk about it on tomorrow's show with hitters, that he also got kind of that late call up, but he might be the guy they put with the way they're using him to play every position, that, he might be in that utility role after having Freeman up for like a month and a half. It is kind of interesting. It was almost like, gotcha. And then they do this big switch, but they're playing him heavily. They're playing him more than they played Freeman, at least it feels like, in terms of consecutive days played. But yeah, it's I know we promised Shaw, and then this is not what I discussed with Justin before the show began. But for me, like, I look at it, and it's like I can't help but look at him and like guys like Lavastida and feel like sometimes, or even a year ago with Naylor, for myself personally, like coming into this year, Naylor wasn't a top 10 prospect for me. Do we overcorrect sometimes on these guys a little too hard? Do you think there's any degree of that? Do you think he has stayed probably in this franchise's eyes? Is that like top 7 prospect he was before the year began, no matter what the service? And kind of, we saw him fall out of top 10s, fall out of that area. Do you think that's probably too much overcorrection with him?
Naylor or Arias?
Arias, but you could say Naylor, you could say Lavastida, all these guys who have like the one bad year where there's also health issues tied to the down year.
I mean, the Naylor thing, I think I've talked about multiple times, at least on Twitter, just saying that just premature dropping him because of the age relative to level. And then you have the COVID year. And if you know about Naylor, the person and the work ethic and how the organization kind of gushes about him, yeah, I think all of that probably should have bought him some more goodwill for a year. Results aside, Lavastida had the one good year, so I still wouldn't probably slide him down too far, although I think it's clear that Naylor is farther ahead of him. And as far as Arias, I don't know. I've kind of been the low man on him. Not that I don't like him as a prospect, but I have questions about the bat and how that's going to play long term, but still top 10 because he is a potential, Gold Glove shortstop. And if the bat ever does come around, which I think it's been actually fine, to be honest with you, in this stint, there's a potential all-star there.
No doubt. I mean, I'll stand by it till the day of whenever, that I thought he was the central piece in that Clevenger trade. I thought he was piece number one for them, just in terms of the way they value up the middle talent. And I love what Quantrell. San Diego needed starters. They had him in the pen. Naylor couldn't even get a regular gig with that. It's a lot of those guys who stepped forward were guys who just were kind of further down. It's going to be, I never want to say anything's going to be that Cologne deal, but that trade definitely has some hints of the Cologne deal. Now, I only say that because they got a Cy Young winner and a guy who was on a Hall of Fame stretch before freak injuries. But just in terms of, I mean, 6 players, 5 of them have contributed to the major league team. That's a heck of a deal.
Yeah, Padres could have Josh Naylor right now if they didn't sign Eric Hosmer, who they had to let go for a prospect.
Oof. I mean, that was like, we all knew that was a bad deal from the drop. Like, outside of like old school sports journalists who just kind of look at like, he's a grinder and he's got a championship pedigree. It's like, we all looked at that deal like, what are they doing? Like, I don't know anyone.
All based on age.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't make a ton of sense at the time, and it certainly doesn't make any more sense now. But speaking of making sense of things, let's give Bryan Shaw some, his due. He was let go, and we were kind of partying about it to a degree. You get into it with Shaw. It's like, yes, the second time around wasn't great. He was, if you're a team, you actually want to get him for like the first 2 months of the year. He's fantastic. And then it just seems to fall off. But when he was at his peak, one can make, I would say, a case that if you're putting together the top 10 bullpen pitchers in Guardians history, the top 10 relievers, first off, it's not an elite group, because I know a few years ago I went through and did all the draft and signed or developed relievers, and 4th all time was David Risky. And David Risky is fine, but not the guy you want 4th all time in terms of B-WAR. We can talk about, Class A is in that group now, obviously. Cody Allen is in that group. But do you stand with me? I mean, Shaw's 3rd all time in appearances. He is, in terms of games finished, not games closed, but just games finished, I believe, is 25th all time. And yeah, I mean, he was not asked to finish games. It is funny that like 24th in games finished is Mel Harder, who I believe is number 2 in games pitched. Like, those two names go together on the leaderboard for Cleveland. And Mel Harder is 1, I'm sorry, and Shaw is 3. But yeah, listen, when he was here the first time, he was hated on unnecessarily when he was the rubber arm guy. This time it wasn't as well. But I guess, how do you feel? Like, do you look back at him? Am I being hyperbolic? Is he, one of the top 10 relievers this team has had? I mean, relief pitching is relatively recent in the whole grand scheme, but I'm willing to say that. I'm willing to say a top 10 reliever all time for the Cleveland Guardians.
Yeah, I mean, when your options are like, Jose Mesa and Mark Jackson, those guys are all pretty good. Or Mike Jackson, I should say. I say Mark Jackson. Andrew Miller, Cody Allen.
Yeah.
You can throw
Eric Plunk.
Eric Plunk was a good one.
Bob Wickman is in there for a lot of things. Like, these are the names. Listen, peak Doug Jones was probably underappreciated for as bad as those teams were. He was actually quite good, but
you could probably throw Class A in there already.
Yeah, agreed.
He's around the top 10. I mean, you've got like Rafi Left and Rafi Right were good for a little bit. They had guys throughout the years. But when you're putting up against guys like, Kerry Wood and Chris Perez, yeah, I think he has room to make it in there. And look, this guy had over 400 innings of work. I'm not saying almost 490 innings. I'm not saying all 490 were good, but he finishes with a 3.4 ERA. If that's the last of his stint in Cleveland as a pitcher, that's pretty good for throwing 400 innings. And nobody has thrown more innings in baseball than him since 2013 among relievers. A third inning more. I guess Kenley Jansen will pass him this year, but yeah, the guy's durable. I mean, I think he's in his peak is everything you wanted in a 7th inning man. Do you want him being your best setup guy? Do you want him being your closer? No, that's why they went and had Cody Allen. That's why they went and got Andrew Miller. But you need 3 good relievers. And look what the Royals did in their stretch in the mid 2000s. They had 3 or 4 good relievers. Bryan Shaw was if Bryan Shaw at his peak was like your third best reliever, I think you're in pretty good shape.
And just to throw some more onto this, like Bryan Shaw, in the postseason, now it's 22 innings, but he had a 2.45 ERA, 9 strikeouts per nine, 2.5 walk. He was actually the same guy in the postseason as he was in the regular season, maybe just a little bit better. So not only was he this guy who, again, third all time in appearances, but was also a solid postseason arm. I mean, look at that 2016 postseason. He appeared in 3 games in Boston, 4 games in Toronto, and 4 games in Chicago. Listen, I know the Chicago games weren't always the best, but he was just incredibly solid in general for this Cleveland team. Now, in fairness, I should say one of the 4 of the games he appeared in for 4 innings were with Arizona back in 2011. So it was actually only 18 in Cleveland, but he was a solid postseason pitcher, is just to get to the point. And as you said, like, he was the glue guy, right? He's there to get you to the next. And in that postseason, he was the guy when those starters were only going 5 innings that he was out there, first guy that Tito went to. So yeah, like I said, we're very happy about a change, I think, in general, but like, I think it's also, we want to take a moment and recognize that this, he's not going to get his number retired, but when I go back and, now that you're the co-host, we should probably sit down and redo the like all-time Guardians team, so we can have some real debates instead of just me debating myself. But like, he's a name that'll come up. And I think that speaks to the player that, at peak that he was. And there were some great moments through the past few years. Part of me is kind of sad, having read like a Meisel piece about a Tito had promised eventually he'd let him bat. It would have been great to see him just bat again. Personally, I would have loved to see once they had like just smacked the White Sox down, like after all that talk of crumbling, it would have been great to be like, and pinch hitting as Bryan Shaw, like just like really, pour in the salt. But do you have any other kind of final closing thoughts on Bryan Shaw before we kick it to our first break?
Yeah, I just think people need to realize that Trevor Stephan probably doesn't have a splitter without Bryan Shaw, and guys learning about arm care, stuff you don't see on the field. And if anybody can stomach it, I know it's hard. If you go back and look at the pitch that he threw to Ben Zobrist in the 2016 World Series that gave the eventual game-winning run and hit, it was like a 97-mile-an-hour cutter on the outside part of the plate. Like, it was a good pitch. Ben Zobrist just beat him. I know that's hard to swallow, but I guess I'll at least give Bryan Shaw his due for that. It was a good pitch.
No, and he was, studied for the rest of it. Speaking of things that are steady, solid, and good, how about one of our Mount Rushmore sponsors? How about one of the people who've been with us the longest? That is Bet Online, your number one source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchup, news, podcasts, and in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find. As always, Bet Online remains your continued source for all of your sports wagering information with live betting, up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all of your favorite games and events, including MLB, MMA, boxing, and golf. Head to Bet Online today or use your mobile device to learn more about the games in action. Get Bet Online, where the game starts. And if you're curious, tomorrow's line, Quantrell versus Lynch, +1.5, but a +115 money line on the -1.5 with Quantrell. I think I would take that. Lynch has been very inconsistent. The 7.5, I think I like the under there, just because we're probably going to see a bunch of rookies on Cleveland side. It's time to rest for the Cleveland Guardians. No time for us to rest. Let's talk postseason. Let's talk roster. Let's talk pitching. Game 1 for the postseason. I know, there's so many choices to go with, but it's got to be Plesac, right? You want to go with your big gun in game 1.
Gotta go back. You gotta bring Bryan Shaw back as the opener. Actually, that's what's got to happen. They got to find a way to get him back on the roster to be an opener. It's against Tampa Bay.
It is against Tampa. I thought when they used Shaw as an opener, it was actually kind of genius. Like, to go back to that, like a highlight for me of Tito this year was then to immediately after like 1 inning go to Kirk McCarty, and their whole lineup is right-handed heavy because Shaw, like, there's a smartness to an opener. If you have that ability to flip it like that, to flip the script, I mean, I think in the postseason it would be a genius move. But probably still want to go with the big 3 of this team right now. And I guess my question to you is like, listen, we know Quantrell is 3, But is there any debate for you between McKenzie or Bieber in game one?
I guess if you want to look at like pure season alone, you could make the argument for Tristan McKenzie. I don't think it matters either way. Um, I guess it would depend really on how things match up for the ALDS, because remember this year the schedule's a little bit weird where they
Yeah.
have like different off days than they used to. So my only twist there would be, okay, how does the schedule match up? When could Bieber and McKenzie be available to pitch in the next round? Like, do you want Bieber pitching 2 games? Do you want McKenzie pitching 2 games? Can they pitch 2 games? Like if you can get one of those 2 guys to pitch 2 games, I'm taking Bieber, I suppose, in the ALDS. I mean, you got to get to the first round first, but I think it just matters how can you stack them for the next round. Like if it's just one round, I'm still taking Bieber over McKenzie. But if you're thinking long term, I think you can make a case.
Do you have any concern at all about like the last time he was out there in the postseason for
No,
Bieber?
I
I
think
mean,
we know these things are all, short sample sizes, weird, and I almost want to throw everything of 2020 out.
Yeah,
Like
agreed.
I don't want to commit any of that to memory, let alone the playoffs that year. So no, I think he would flush that. I think we should all flush that.
No, I agree. Like that 2020 season is just oddity among oddity. Uh, Everything is hard to understand, accept, or really consider when you look at that year. But yeah, I mean, I lean towards that. I've thrown out there when I've talked to Sully about using game theory and the Chinese horse racing theory about like not throwing your best horse in game one, so then you have better matchups in game 2 and 3. Obviously, in round one, that's not even something you'd consider as that game theory approach to like things. I'll be curious to see. Someday, some team is going to do it. Like there are too many teams that use advanced thought that eventually they're going to see that team that's throwing their Quantrell in game one and then throwing their 2 guys in the next 2. I don't think we're going to see it this year. I agree. Bieber, McKenzie, Quantrell. As this thing opens up, who's the 4 to you? I think that's where, I don't know if I want to say it gets interesting. It feels like they don't have a ton of choices. So I think it's maybe not that interesting, but it's so settled. And then it feels kind of unsettled to me in spot 4. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think it has to be Civale. I don't think you can go any other way with that. Plesac's had a strange season, and I know they said you can't expect him to be in mid-season form after his last start when he came back from the broken hand or whatever he had going on there after he punched the mound. But I don't see how you can trust anybody but Civale. The only weird thing is going to be Plesac starts on Wednesday now. So if Civale doesn't pitch Wednesday in like a piggyback role, he will have, I think, 11 days off between starts. So that's going to be a weird thing.
Yeah, and he's, it's been a weird year for him as well. I mean, it's just my continued concern, the same before the year, and we've seen it this year. It's like health has been a bugaboo for him in the majors and the minors. Like, I don't think he has had a healthy season at any step of the way. You do have to be, it is interesting because he was also, boy, did he struggle those first few months. And then he seemed to, you wonder if the health issues even started earlier in the year, because it does certainly seem like he got better after the big injuries, that he has been kind of better with the few starts that he's had since, the June, July data. I feel like has been, every month has been a little bit better.
Well, here's 2 questions for you as it relates to pitching, going back to the Bieber McKenzie thing. If it was still a 1-game format for the wild card, are you even having a debate of McKenzie or Bieber? Because to your point, remember Cleveland tried to do this in the ALDS years ago with Kluber going game 2 against the Red Sox in 16, and then although I think that was more due to his hamstring, and then they did it in 2017, and I don't know if that had to do with Kluber's back. And then to the Plesac Civale debate, who do you trust more as a reliever? Do you trust one of them more to come into a game in the first round as a bullpen arm versus more than the other one?
It is interesting just from the perspective of like the last time this happened, right? Like they trusted Plesac over Civale back in that 2020 season.
That's right.
That they went there. Now Plesac had that great year, but I'll stand that it is very funny that you look at that 2020 season. Kenta Maeda, Zach Plesac, even Shane Bieber to a degree, they only had to face the Central. And I think we saw the stratification of numbers when they didn't have to face some of those tougher teams. They got to face a lot of cupcakes, and we saw a lot of players on a lot of teams excel facing that. Now, that year, they obviously felt more comfortable. But again, Plesac was the better player that year. So was that about like how they feel guys can translate, or is that just a top performance? I would be honestly, I don't think either of them is someone I'm going to go to in the pen. Like, unless it's a blowout situation, the with the way this pen is set up and with the pen being really good. Like, listen, I loved that 2016 team as much as anyone. Andrew Miller and Cody Allen were absolutely fantastic. Shaw was relatively solid, but you didn't have anyone beyond that. Like this year, you're talking about 99 Stefan, even with Stefan's question marks in Class A, and Clase is well on his way to being the greatest reliever in franchise history. And then you throw in like Sam Henches, who I believe still has the second or has the best ERA of any reliever in the second half. Sandlin, who, control can occasionally get away from him, but for the most part has been like the depth there. Like, I guess my question is if you go Civale, does Plesac even come out unless it's a blowout or extra innings?
Yeah, I can't imagine they're going to use either of those guys in a situation. They're certainly not going to do it with runners on, because you're not going to bring a starter in to a situation with runners on if you don't have to. But if they go to extra innings, I guess you have to no matter what, because the runner on second roll. So I don't know. That's a good question. I'm really curious to see actually if Civale pitches Wednesday now, because I thought he was starting the final game of the season. Now it's Plesac, but I just don't want to see Civale go 11 days without pitching if he ends up pitching, if they're fortunate enough to get to the ALDS.
How weird is it that we're talking about the season ending on a Wednesday? I spent the last half a decade writing like my way too early mock, and I just sit there on Sunday and write it out as it's happening, get it done. And I'm not even close to ready, because I'm just like, no, I have a weekend to work on it. It's like, no, we're gonna finish the season on a Wednesday. Postseason starts on Friday. Go. Like, there's been a lot of changes this year, but like this to me is one of the most jarring. Like, what's your kind? Is it feel as weird to you as it feels to me?
I think it feels weird from the fact they're playing the same team 6 days in a row to end the season. That's about the only thing.
Yeah, and then the team they faced before that is the team they're going to face in the postseason. It's
Yeah.
definitely an odd end, but I think we're in agreement. Bieber, Plesac. We didn't really talk about Quantrell, but it's like he is the most set guy, just because he's not the top two, and he's definitely not in that second group. And then Civale, and then I mean, but then again, what? So we also should probably talk about Civale. Probably won't be on the postseason roster for the Tampa series, right? Like, he'll probably not be a part of it. And with Plesac starting, he may not be a part of the postseason. Like, neither of those starters might potentially. That's going to be something like if Civale doesn't pitch, then he's probably on the postseason roster in that opening series as a reliever. And if they, which would then set up Plesac, I guess, to be your fourth, that might be what telegraphs all of this. But it's going to be interesting because one of those two pitchers is not going to be on the postseason roster, right? Or am I overreading things?
I guess it depends what they want to do with Kirk McCarty, because I mean, obviously Clase, 99, Stefan, Sandlin, Henches, Morgan, De Los Santos are all making it. So you have all those guys. I would assume Cody Morris is making it. And then you decide between, McCarty. I don't see McCarty as a guy making the postseason roster. He just kind of hangs out as a emergency dude at this point. I think I read somewhere they're talking about, what was it, 12 pitchers and 14 position players for the first round. That was kind of the balance. So Bieber, McKenzie, Quantrill, and then one starter, and then your bullpen minus McCarty. So the only guys they're dropping from the current 28 would be McCarty, and then whoever's not going to start the third game. So or who wouldn't be the extra guy. So if they really want Civale to go game one of the LDS, you drop McCarty and Civale, and Plesac goes to the bullpen. Just depends on who they trust there and who they want to pitch game one of the LDS, because you do have to plan for that, because it's 2 days later, or it's a day later.
Well, why don't we take our next break here? It seems like a natural point. We'll come back, kind of dig a little bit more into this, figuring out the pen, figuring out who maybe gets, left off, who's sitting at home, kind of the logic of it all. And then maybe trying to parse what we think Tampa is going to do in terms of the other side. Like, how is Tampa going to try to line this up in terms of what would benefit them in the postseason? It's going to be interesting. Cleveland North versus Cleveland South is what it very much looks like in the opening round of this playoff series. Like I said, a quick break. from our sponsors. And we're back. So can I throw a name out there, like someone we have not talked about really, because he's not currently on the roster, but could be? Is there any world where they decide, like, instead of Kirk McCarty being that extra guy, that Connor Pilkington, based on like the last start, maybe because of the stuff, like he's got better stuff, we know, than McCarty. Could he be? They don't really have, a trusted lefty outside of Stefan, right? Is there anyone else no? I mean, could it be Pilkington? Could he be kind of a surprise, just as like almost like a loogie type for them in a role that could be used in the postseason? Or is this just me grasping for straws, looking at like the 5 pitchers that are on roster who could potentially contribute?
I mean, if you want to talk about just like pure talent and who you are going to get the best outing from, I'd probably guess Pilkington. But I think the point here is if you are pitching McCarty or Pilkington in a playoff game, things have either gone really badly or hopefully they've gone so good that you are up by so much you trust one of those guys to milk some innings away. I would probably lean McCarty if anything is going to happen because he's pitched the most recently. I'm sure Pilkington is stuck around the city. I know some guys stayed in Columbus to work out just in case they were activated. But McCarty's been the guy throwing recently for them. And hey, they went ahead and DFA'd Bryan Shaw instead of Kirk McCarty when we all thought it would have been Kirk McCarty. So that tells me they at least value what he brings to the table. I would like to see them have a second lefty because I don't know what Tampa Bay's lineup looks like, lefty righty splits, but
you got guys like Ji-Man Choi who are like really extreme. Like he's the guy you definitely want. Arandia has been a bit that way as well for them. And then David Peralta, who, I really feel like is not as extreme, but I think those are currently the only lefties that, are on their roster. And then it's the lefties are kind of the guys who are hurt. It's the Brandon Lowe, the Kevin Kiermaiers, and some of their more injured guys. But Ji-Man Choi in particular, I feel like is a strict platoon bat. I don't know what a blat is, but bat. And then, I don't know. I'd have to look at like Taylor Walls has had a rough year in general with the bat. It's gotten a little bit better, but I have to look at him and Wander Franco and Francisco Milla and Vidal Brujan, who are the switch hitters who could potentially make the roster, to see if any of them have extreme splits. But those are kind of the guys on the other side of things when you're looking at that. They're definitely the negative, the hit on one of those guys making it is they're more of a righty team. Yandy and as a Randy Reza Rain. I'm not going to say it's a Randy A. Harold Ramirez, we know, is almost like a strict platoon bat, is a right-hander. Margot is, he's a right-hand bat. You almost don't want a lefty to go in this one. So maybe that's part of it. Maybe that's part of the logic that they won't take a second lefty, that you instead got the starters in this one if you need them.
Yeah, I think there's any need to. And Sam Henches doesn't have any real platoon splits either from when last time I looked. So I think you're pretty much set for this round. Maybe you think about it again against the Yankees, but I think the Yankees are also pretty right-handed heavy, if I'm not mistaken. So
it's like, and with the Yankees, I mean, I saw the great stat today. I wish I knew where I could credit, but it's like second half OPS for Aaron Judge, second half OPS for everyone who isn't Aaron Judge is a 656. Like that team has completely imploded. And obviously I don't think a platoon split really matters too much for Aaron Judge this year. But the rest of that team is just offensively, like one can make a case if you eliminate the best player on the Guardians and the best player on the Yankees, that the Guardians have the better lineup right now. One can make that case very easily, just to throw out there. And, Rizzo really fell off. A lot of guys really kind of second half imploded. And, you get rid of Aaron Judge, get rid of Andres Jimenez, the best player on each team. I'm intentionally doing that just to get people annoyed. Hey, listen, I'm not alone. Jason Stark, 5th in the MVP voting, Jimenez, 6th, Jose Ramirez. So, I think let's put it this way. I am not afraid of any team in this postseason. We saw Cleveland play well against Houston. Houston, I think, is definitely the cream of the crop, but I would put Cleveland up against anyone my question to you, listen, we already kind of talked about the bullpen. We know what the bullpen is likely going to be. Do we think there's any weirdness that could happen like 2016? Do you think that all of a sudden we might see Class A and a multi-inning role? Do you think we'll get into that? Or is it just because this bullpen is so deep and so good that we won't see that? Do you think there's also be that tendency to have starters only go, once they're going to go through the lineup a third time, nope, immediately go to the bullpen and start going through and using those pitchers?
I don't know. I would imagine they're going to ride Bieber and McKenzie as long as they can until they feel like there's some signs there. Hopefully not to the detriment. I hope they've got somebody warming up just in case, but I know they're careful about that. Quantrill, I feel like, is probably a guy that they're going to watch carefully times through the order in the postseason. As for Class A multi-inning, that's not something he's done all year. I feel like Francona is not the manager to do something different in the postseason he's done all year. Now, I know, like you might say, 2016, the bullpen was employed differently, but that was more out of desperation and necessity than it was a plan. Like, they planned on having Kluber and Carrasco and or Bauer or Salazar going 6 innings if they could. Instead, it was Kluber for as long as he could go and everybody else one time through the order, and then unleash Miller. This year, I think they want to get as much as Bieber out of Bieber McKenzie as they can and play the matchups from there, would be my guess. The only weird thing I think is going to be the lineup. I was thinking about this today, is that Will Brennan doesn't have any like crazy platoon splits in the minors. He didn't fare as well against lefties in AAA as he did in AA, but those are all extremely small samples. But if you look at, I know you've talked about this multiple times, Owen Miller against lefties is not, it's not a platoon advantage. He's not good. But I just have a feeling in the postseason, it's going to be Shane Bieber, Shane McClanahan game 1, and Will Brennan's going to be on the bench. I just have that kind of sinking feeling right now that Owen Miller is starting game 1 because they're facing a lefty. That's the weirdness, the bad weird.
Yeah, no, and like, okay, like what I'm trying to get to is like, it's not like you and I are talking about trade secrets. It's not like you and I are talking about anything that is not like kind of surface knowledge to anyone who does it. Like, there's things the Guardians have statistically that you and I probably don't even know about, would struggle to understand. We're talking about some very basic things, and we could see a situation where they bench who has been arguably their hottest hitter for Owen Miller, who, by the way, is well on his way to being their second worst hitter this year. Like, if Miles Straw hasn't passed him a runs created plus yet, it's going to happen any day now. Owen Miller, outside of the fact that Austin Hedges is about ready to put up one of the worst seasons in the history of modern baseball, Owen Miller is next up. Like, I'm gonna make my hot take of the day here. Like, honestly, Owen Miller, with all the talent they have in the pipeline, I wouldn't be upset if he was designated for assignment to make room for someone like Martinez this offseason. Because listen, you have Freeman, you have Arias, you have this next wave that is already here and probably better equipped to the role. So people loved Owen Miller at the start of the year, and I know there's still many fans, and he's an interesting, fun little player, but like, they just have more talent. And this year, I mean, you get rid of the first month and a half, and he has been a multi level below average player in his time.
Forget earlier this year. Do you remember last April when he was the hottest hitter in AAA and everyone's like, gotta get Owen Miller up here, gotta get him up here.
Yeah, he's like almost 400 or something. And I'm like, listen, it's a profile I hate. Like, let's be honest, it's why I'm lower on Tyler Freeman than most. It's why I'm not as high on, so it's when you don't walk, and it's to a degree, it's why I wasn't high on Bobby Bradley. When you don't have a secondary skill, it's hard. You need to do 2 things really well. And when it's one skill, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah, I mean, only thing I look at is he hit everywhere in the minors, and the numbers are fine. And he only played in the minors for 3 1/4 seasons. So, like, I'm willing to give some leeway here that he's still going to be a better hitter than he's shown. Obviously, I don't think he's anywhere as good as he was in April, but I don't know if they have room on this roster. In the we have all offseason to talk about this.
Yeah, but no, that's kind of my hot take. It's just like, and listen, if I wouldn't be surprised if he ends up being average. If he ends up being an average hitter, it's just the overall talent in the organization. I think he's below. And then what they've done a very nice thing about, I think, this front office, especially towards the end of the year, is they've taken away Tito's negative safety blankets. Like, they've taken away Clement, they've taken away Shaw. Owen Miller is the last of those guys who's a negative safety blanket, and a guy whose performance does not justify um, the usage rate. And he's kind of the last man standing from that group. I know they work in lockstep with Tito, so you wouldn't see him not make the postseason roster. But I wonder if there's any discussion of like, listen, if we include him, you're going to have exactly what you talked about, a situation where Brennan rides the bench so Miller can play against a lefty, and he doesn't hit lefties. Now, I agree with you. McClanahan is probably game one. How do we think the rest of this is shaping up? If I was looking correctly, Springs pitches tomorrow for Tampa, which is to the benefit of Cleveland. He's a bad matchup for Cleveland to begin with. So we're probably looking at Kluber in game two.
Unless they go to Glass now in game two. And I don't know what his pitch count is, but if they could go to him game two and kind of ride a bullpen game after that. But yeah, I would imagine one of those two is game two, Glass now or Kluber.
Yeah, I think they kind of blew it to a degree. Like, maybe I'm wrong in this, but like not holding Springs or not reworking things down the stretch. He's had a great year. He would be a really bad matchup for Cleveland. And when we saw that when he recently pitched against him, he's the type of lefty they struggle with. That feels like a general mistake for Tampa down the stretch, is that they're having him go, and they would be better. Like, if I was running Tampa, it's like your top three pitchers in the postseason, in my opinion, when you're facing Cleveland: McClanahan, Springs, and Rasmussen. And Cleveland's dodging two of those guys. I think that's, am I making too big of a deal? Or do you agree that like Springs and Rasmussen likely not being starters is a bit of a misplay by Tampa here?
Yeah, I'd have to dig more into Drew Rasmussen. I know it was a benefit they missed him last time, but yeah, Springs for sure is a bad matchup for them just because of the platoon advantage. And I don't even know how good, if Owen Miller is like any bit better than Josh Naylor, because Josh Naylor struggles against lefties too, but it can't be that much of a difference. But either way, that would be an advantage Tampa Bay for sure, especially when you consider they've got three lefties in their bullpen. They're probably all making the postseason roster too.
I mean, Rasmussen's got a 326 FIP. He's been worth 2.9 wins in 28 starts, 146 innings. It's just weird that he's not their matchup. I think, like I said, I think Tampa kind of messed this up. That is my opinion. Tampa is one of the smartest organizations of baseball, though, so I am probably wrong. I can see the timer ticking away, so we should probably be at the wrap up. Make sure to hit up Justin and myself. Let us know what you think. Tomorrow we're going to get into the hitters. This will be interesting because we will do who we think is going to be there and who maybe we think should be there when it comes to the Guardians in the postseason. We will also discuss the Tuesday game as well. But I have been Jeff Ellis. I will say, my co-host is Justin Latta. And as I end every show, go Guardians, go. And hey, everyone, you get to see me fumble, and I'll do it again. Go Guardians, go.